Nobody in Red Rock Flats understood why Cole Hargrove paid $1 for a pile of charred timber and ash. Nobody until the land itself screamed its secret back at him from underground. A bounty hunter bought a burned-out barn for $1, and what the basement concealed beneath those blackened ruins would shake the entire territory to its foundation, drag 3 dead men's names back into the light, and put a corrupt sheriff's neck right where the noose had always been waiting. That dollar was the most dangerous coin Cole Hargrove ever spent, and before the dust settled on Red Rock Flats, he would understand exactly why someone had tried so desperately to burn that barn to nothing. Cole Hargrove had been riding through the New Mexico territory for 11 days straight when he first spotted the charred skeleton of the Aldrin property rising against the copper-colored evening sky. He was a lean man, broad across the shoulders, somewhere in his late 30s, with the kind of face that had been sun-cured and wind-scoured into something that looked less like skin and more like old saddle leather. His hair was dark brown, almost black, cut short and pushed back beneath a wide-brimmed hat the color of midnight. His eyes were the peculiar pale gray of winter storm clouds, the sort of eyes that caught detail at distances that made men uneasy when they realized he had been watching them long before they noticed him. He wore a long black duster coat over a dark vest, and his gun belt was worn smooth along the draw side, the leather creased from years of use. 2 revolvers rested in their holsters at his hips, and a Winchester rifle lay balanced across his saddle horn. He had the relaxed posture of a man who had learned long ago that tension wasted energy, but there was something coiled beneath that ease, a readiness, like a spring compressed under immense pressure. His horse, a dark bay gelding he called Cinder, slowed to a walk as they crested the low ridge overlooking the Aldrin property. The remains of the barn stood at the far edge of the parcel, a blackened ribcage of scorched beams jutting from a carpet of ash and collapsed timber, the whole ruin surrounded by scrub brush that the fire had somehow spared. The farmhouse itself was long gone, reduced to a stone chimney standing alone in the weeds like a monument to some private grief. The land auction notice had said the parcel was 40 acres. It had said the structure had suffered significant fire damage. What it had not said, what nobody bothered to mention, was that the property had been the site of a murder 18 months prior, and that the Aldrin family had vanished from Red Rock Flats before the last ember cooled. Cole had not come to Red Rock Flats for the land. He had come for a man named Doyle Vance. Doyle Vance was wanted in 3 territories for armed robbery, murder, and the burning of a post office in Silver Creek that had killed a deputy marshal and 2 civilians. The reward on Vance's head was $450, dead or alive, posted by the U.S. Marshal's Service out of Santa Fe. Cole had been tracking him for 6 weeks, following a cold trail that wound through desert towns and canyon camps and a dozen roadside cantinas where the barkeepers looked at him with carefully neutral faces and said they had not seen nobody fitting that description. But trails that go cold do not vanish, they just get buried under layers of misdirection, and Cole Hargrove had been peeling back layers for 20 years. He was good at it. It was the only thing he had ever been truly good at. The lead that brought him to Red Rock Flats had come from a horse trader in Las Cruces, who had sold a roan mare to a heavy-set man with a thick black beard and a red bandana around his neck, Vance's description to a whisker, 3 weeks prior. The horse trader had mentioned, almost as an aside, that the man had asked for directions not to any town but to a specific parcel of land south of Red Rock Flats. An old farm, the man had said, with a barn. Cole had ridden into Red Rock Flats the previous afternoon and asked quiet questions at the general store and the barber's shop, and finally at the county clerk's office, where a thin-necked young man with ink-stained fingers had told him, somewhat nervously, that the Aldrin property had gone up for auction that very morning. An anonymous buyer had submitted the winning bid by postal letter. $1, the minimum, the only bid received. The deed transfer was already being processed. $1 for a burned-out barn. Cole had stood very still in that clerk's office for a long moment, his pale gray eyes fixed on the middle distance, running the arithmetic of it. Someone wanted that land, not for farming, not for cattle, for what was already there, for what was already hidden there before the fire, beneath the fire, surviving the fire. He had ridden out to the property that same evening. If you enjoy stories like this one, with twists, grit, and Old West justice, consider subscribing to the channel. There's plenty more where this came from, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The evening air smelled of cold ash and creosote bush as Cole dismounted at the edge of the burned property and tied Cinder to a gnarled juniper post that had somehow survived whatever catastrophe had consumed everything else. He walked slowly toward the ruin, his boots crunching on the brittle crust of ash-covered soil, his eyes moving methodically across the ground around him. He was reading the earth the way other men read newspapers, looking for stories written in disturbance and pressure, in the fresh-turned soil and the faint impressions of boot heels and horse hooves. What he found stopped him cold 10 yards from the barn's collapsed entrance. Tracks. 2 sets, one set approaching the ruins from the north, from the direction of town, moving with the purposeful stride of a man who knew where he was going. The other set was different, lighter, moving in a small, tight circle near the base of what remained of the barn's eastern wall, as though someone had stood there in the dark, undecided, turning back and forth before finally moving not toward the ruins, but away from them, south, into the desert scrub. The lighter tracks were half obscured by wind, but they were there, recent enough that the edges had not yet crumbled in the dry air. No more than a day old, perhaps less. Cole crouched low over the lighter tracks and examined them without touching the ground. Smaller boot, narrower heel, not a man's print, or if a man's, then a very slight one. He straightened up and stood there in the gathering dusk, listening to the desert settle into night around him, the distant call of a nighthawk cutting the silence. Then he turned his attention to the ruins themselves. The burned barn had been a substantial structure, once 60 feet long at least, built from thick timber that had resisted the fire long enough to create a pattern of partial collapse rather than total obliteration. The eastern and northern walls had come down, but the western wall remained standing to about half its original height, and beneath the debris of the collapsed roof, there were dark spaces between the fallen beams, gaps that a man could squeeze through if he was willing. Cole drew one of his revolvers and moved to the nearest gap, listening hard before he pushed a charred beam aside with his boot and ducked into the ruin's interior. The smell hit him first. Beneath the familiar char and smoke odor, there was something else, something organic and damp that did not belong in a burned ruin in the high desert. Cole stood motionless in the darkness, letting his eyes adjust, and gradually the interior of the collapsed barn resolved itself around him. The floor was thick with fallen debris, timber, ash, collapsed stalls, the rusted remnants of iron hinges and hardware. But near the center of the structure, where the hayloft had once stood above the main floor, something was different. The debris had been disturbed, not recently but deliberately. Someone had cleared a path through the wreckage, pushing beams and ash to either side, creating a narrow corridor through the destruction that led to a specific point on the floor beneath what had been the center beam of the loft. Cole followed the corridor with his eyes and then with his feet, stepping carefully over the debris, his revolver raised, until he stood at the end of the cleared path and looked down. There was a trapdoor in the barn floor. It was heavy, 2 inches of solid oak planking, iron-banded, set flush into the floor so that it would have been invisible beneath the hay when the barn was in use. The fire had blackened the wood on its surface but had not burned through it. The thick oak had charred but held, and the iron fittings had merely darkened and rusted at their edges, and the door was not locked. The hasp was unlatched, lying open, suggesting that someone had passed through it recently enough that they had not troubled to lock it on their way out, or had fled in sufficient haste that locking it had not been possible. Cole stood over the trapdoor for a full 30 seconds, listening to the silence of the ruin around him, the creak of the standing western wall in the desert wind, the distant sounds of Cinder shifting his weight at the juniper post outside. Then he gripped the iron ring set into the trapdoor's surface and pulled. The door swung upward on hinges that had been recently oiled, another detail that registered sharp and cold in Cole's mind, and a wash of cool, damp air rose from the darkness below. He could smell it clearly now, earth and water and something else, something alive and human, like the smell of a room where a person has been sleeping. Below the trapdoor, cut rough into the hard caliche soil, a wooden ladder descended into darkness. Cole reached into his duster pocket and produced a small oil lantern, which he lit with practiced efficiency, and descended the ladder with the lantern in his left hand and the revolver in his right. The basement was larger than any basement had any right to be beneath a barn that size. It was not a root cellar or a storm shelter, it was a room, deliberately built and deliberately hidden, perhaps 10 feet high and 30 feet across, with rough timber walls and a packed earth floor. It was furnished. That was what struck Cole first and hardest, as the lantern's light pushed the darkness back and revealed what the basement concealed. There were cots along 2 walls, 4 of them, with blankets folded at the foot of each. There was a long table in the center, and on the table were the remnants of recent occupation: tin cups, empty food tins, a half-burned lantern similar to Cole's own. On one of the cots there was a saddlebag, buckled shut. On the table there was a leather-bound ledger, its cover worn smooth and dark with handling. And stacked against the far wall, half covered with a canvas tarpaulin that someone had dragged partway aside as though they had been examining the contents, were wooden crates. Cole counted them in the lantern light. 12 crates, roughly 2 feet square each, stenciled on their sides with numbers and letters that he recognized immediately as U.S. Army quartermaster codes. He crossed to the nearest crate and crouched beside it, examining the stenciling more closely. Then he stood and looked at the stack as a whole, and felt the particular cold weight settle into his chest that always came when a situation turned out to be considerably larger than the man he had been hired to find. He was reaching for the canvas tarpaulin when he heard the sound. It came from behind the cot in the far left corner, a soft, involuntary intake of breath, quickly stifled, the sound of someone who had been holding very still and had momentarily lost control of their breathing. Cole turned slowly, raising the lantern, and pointed the revolver at the shadow behind the cot. "Step out," he said. His voice was level, carrying no particular heat. "Step out slow and keep your hands where I can see them. I'm a bounty hunter, not a killer, but that distinction gets blurry if you come out fast." There was a long pause. Then the shadow moved. She came out from behind the cot with her hands raised to shoulder height, her chin up, her eyes fixed on him with an expression that was exhausted and frightened and fiercely, defiantly composed all at once. She was young, early 20s, perhaps with dark brown hair that had been pinned up but was now half fallen around a face that was pale beneath its tan, hollow-cheeked from what looked like several days without proper food. She was wearing a gray dress that had seen considerable hardship recently, a dark canvas jacket over it, and sturdy riding boots. Her brown eyes were steady despite the fear in them, and she did not lower her hands even as she spoke. "My name is Elena Marsh," she said. "My father is Thomas Marsh, who ranches up near Silver Creek. I have been in this basement for 4 days and I am not armed and I am not with them. I am a witness." She paused, and the composure cracked just slightly at the edges before she reassembled it. "Please don't shoot me." Cole lowered the revolver but did not holster it. "With who?" he said. "Who's them?" "The Vance gang," Elena Marsh said. "Doyle Vance and his men. They've been using this place for 6 months. That's what's in those crates, army supplies they robbed from the Fort Sumner quartermaster train in September. Rifles, ammunition, enough to start a small war." She lowered her hands slowly, watching his face for any sign that he was going to stop her. "But that's not the worst of it." "What's the worst of it?" Cole said. Elena looked at the leather ledger on the table. "The worst of it," she said carefully, "is in that book." Cole pulled a stool from beneath the table and set it in front of Elena. "Sit down," he said. "You look like you're about to fold." He produced a canteen from his belt and set it on the table beside her. "Drink, and then start from the beginning." Elena sat. She drank with the controlled desperation of someone who has been rationing water, took 3 long swallows, and set the canteen down. Then she looked at Cole with those steady brown eyes and told him the story. She had come to Red Rock Flats 5 days ago to visit her mother's sister, who lived at the edge of town and kept a small dry goods shop on the main street. Her route from Silver Creek had taken her south along the old wagon road that passed within half a mile of the Aldrin property. She had been riding alone. Her father had asked her to wait for an escort, and she had not waited. A decision she had been revisiting bitterly every hour since, and her horse had thrown a shoe on the rocky stretch of road near the Aldrin turnoff. She had walked the horse to the nearest structure, which was the burned barn, intending to shelter there for the night and continue into town in the morning. She had found the trapdoor by accident, in the dark, when she had put her foot through a gap in the debris over it and felt it give. She had dropped through the opening into the top of the ladder and barely caught herself, and in the process she had knocked the lantern off the table below and heard voices outside the barn, Vance's men, returning to the camp after a supply run into town. She had pulled the trapdoor shut above her and pressed herself into the darkest corner of the basement and stayed there while 4 men descended the ladder and spent the next 2 hours in the room below her, talking in voices that grew louder and less careful as the whiskey they had brought from town went down. And what she heard in those 2 hours had kept her frozen in the darkness long after the men climbed back up and rode away at dawn. "They were talking about the sheriff," Elena said. "Sheriff Denton Wade. He knows about this place. He's known for months." She paused. "He's not just looking the other way. He's in it with them. He gets a cut of every job they run through this territory. Has been for 2 years." And in that ledger, she nodded at the book on the table. Vance kept records, every payment, every job, names and dates and amounts, going back to when it all started. She pressed her lips together, including the Aldrin family. Cole had been still throughout this account, his pale eyes on her face, reading the truth of it in the way she told it, the specific, uncomfortable details, the way fear and exhaustion kept breaking through the surface of her composure, the absence of the kind of practiced smoothness that came with a rehearsed lie. He believed her. He was not a man who believed easily or often, but he believed her. "The Aldrins," he said. "What happened to them?" "Vance's men," Elena said. "Old Hector Aldrin found out what was being built under his barn, found the men digging it, or found the finished room. She didn't know the details, only what the men had said that night. Aldrin had gone to the sheriff, and the sheriff had told Vance. And the Aldrin family, Hector, his wife Margaret, their 2 grown sons had disappeared." She stopped. Her jaw was tight. They burned the barn thinking they were burning the evidence, but the room survived. And Vance kept that ledger somewhere else and only brought it here when he came to count the crates and plan the next job. Cole stood and crossed to the table and picked up the ledger. He opened it at random and scanned a page. Names and figures, written in a cramped but legible hand. Dates, locations. The abbreviation W appearing regularly alongside sums that ranged from $50 to several hundred. W for Wade. He turned to the first entry and read the date, 14 months prior. He turned to the last entry and read a date 3 weeks old. Then he closed the book. "Who else knows you're here?" he said. "Nobody. I couldn't get out. They came back twice more after that first night. I hid each time. I've been eating what was left in the food tins and rationing the water from the barrel in the corner." She looked at the canteen. "I was going to try to leave tonight, in the dark. I didn't know how close any of them might be." "You said 4 days," Cole said. "The tracks outside someone came here recently. Today, maybe yesterday." Elena shook her head. "Yesterday afternoon, one man, alone. He came down here, looked at the crates, looked at the ledger. He didn't find me. I was behind the false wall." She nodded toward the right side of the room, and Cole turned and looked and realized, with the particular satisfaction of a man who had missed something important, that what he had taken for a section of timber paneling was actually a narrow door, slightly ajar, opening on a space perhaps 2 feet deep. A hiding place built into the hiding place. "He took some papers from the crates," Elena continued, "folded them and put them inside his coat. Then he left. Could you see him? Would you know him?" "Not his face, but I heard him mutter to himself when he couldn't find what he was looking for in the crates, and I recognized the voice." She looked at Cole steadily. It was Sheriff Wade. The silence in the basement stretched out between them. Outside and above, the desert wind moved through the ruin of the barn, making the standing western wall groan in the dark. "All right," Cole said at last. He picked up the ledger and tucked it inside his duster. "We're leaving. Now, you ride with me back to Red Rock Flats." "We can't go to the sheriff," Elena said immediately. "I know. We're not going to the sheriff. I have a name to find first." He looked at her. "Can you ride?" "I can ride anything with 4 legs," she said, with a flash of something that was almost humor. "I grew up on a cattle ranch." Cole allowed himself a small nod. "Good. The crates stay. We can't take them, but they're not going anywhere. Once we're clear of this place, I'll wire the U.S. Marshals in Santa Fe. They'll send men. But I need Vance first, and if Wade is here cleaning up, Vance may already know I'm in the territory." They came up out of the basement into the cold night air of the burned barn, and Cole latched the trapdoor behind them. He helped Elena through the debris to the open air, and they walked quickly to where Cinder waited at the juniper post. Cole untied the horse, checked his saddlebags, and swung up. He pulled Elena up behind him in one smooth motion, and Cinder moved off at a steady trot north toward the distant scatter of lights that was Red Rock Flats. Red Rock Flats was the kind of town that looked almost respectable from a distance and revealed its character more honestly at close range. A main street of perhaps 12 buildings, half of them false-fronted, running north-south between a water tower that leaked at its base and a church whose bell had been cracked since anyone in town could remember. There was a jail, a general store, a barber shop that also served as the town's only dentist, 2 saloons, a hotel of 4 rooms, and the sheriff's office at the south end of the main street, its lamp burning yellow in the window like a bad eye. At 11 o'clock on a cold Thursday night, Red Rock Flats was quiet in the way that small towns in the territory got quiet after dark. Not peaceful, but watchful. The way a man goes quiet when he is listening for something coming. Cole rode into town from the South Road and turned off the main street 2 blocks before the sheriff's office, taking a back lane between the general store and a shuttered milliner's shop to the rear of the hotel. He got Elena down from the horse and inside through the back door with a minimum of exposure to the street, and settled her in his room on the 2nd floor with the door locked and the chair propped under the handle. "Stay here," he said. "Don't open the door for anyone except me. If someone tries to force it, the window opens onto the roof of the porch below, and from there it's 10 feet to the alley. You've got options." Elena sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her jacket around her. She looked less fragile now that there was food. Cole had stopped at his saddlebag and given her jerked beef and hardtack, which she was eating with methodical efficiency. "Where are you going?" "The telegraph office first. Then I'm going to find Doyle Vance. He might not be in town. If Wade went to the barn yesterday, he went because Vance told him to. And if Wade is still in his office with the lamp burning, Vance is probably close. Men like Vance don't let their bankers out of arm's reach." Cole turned to go. "Mr. Hargrove." He stopped and looked back. Elena had the hardtack in one hand and was looking at him with those steady brown eyes. "I've been in that basement for 4 days thinking about what I would do if someone found me before I got out. I was afraid it would be one of them. I want you to know I understand what you did tonight was not kindness, you're after the reward money. But I'm grateful anyway." Cole considered this for a moment. $450, he said. "That's the reward on Vance. But something tells me the U.S. Marshals are going to be considerably more interested in a ledger that ties a sitting county sheriff to a 1.5 years of robbery and murder. That kind of information has a different kind of value." He paused. "Get some sleep." He went out and locked the door behind him. The telegraph office was located above the general store, reached by an exterior staircase on the building's north side. The operator, a young man named Hicks, who was just dozing off over his equipment when Cole knocked, came awake with a start and agreed to send an urgent wire to the U.S. Marshals in Santa Fe with the combination of Cole's steady gaze and $2 silver. The wire went out at 11:20, marked urgent, describing the location of the barn, the crates, and the nature of the evidence contained in the ledger. Cole gave his own name, his bond number as a licensed bounty hunter in New Mexico territory, and a request for a deputy marshal to arrive in Red Rock Flats within 36 hours. Then he went looking for Doyle Vance. He had learned enough about Vance's habits in 6 weeks of trailing him to have a workable theory. Vance was a man who liked comfort when he could get it, who made his men sleep rough in desert camps, while he himself took a room wherever there was a hotel to be had. In a town the size of Red Rock Flats, with one hotel of 4 rooms, Vance would either be in that hotel or in the better of the 2 saloons. The hotel was where Cole had just been, which left the saloon. The Red Mesa Saloon sat in the middle of the main street, its piano still going at this hour, a rectangle of yellow lamplight falling from its windows into the dusty street. Cole pushed through the swing doors and stood for a moment just inside the entrance, letting his eyes move across the room with the particular unhurried patience that had kept him alive for 20 years, in a profession where most men who started in it did not retire from it. There were perhaps 15 men in the Red Mesa at this hour, 4 at the bar, 2 playing cards at a table near the window, a group of 5 cattlemen deep in conversation in the rear, and at a table by himself near the back wall, a heavy-set man with a thick black beard and a red bandana around his neck, a glass of whiskey at his right hand, and a deck of cards he was playing solitaire with spread before him on the table, his dark eyes moving with a watchful regularity across the room. Doyle Vance, exactly as described, almost exactly as Cole had imagined. Cole crossed the room at a measured walk, not rushing, not skulking. He pulled out the chair across from Vance and sat down in it, resting his hands on the table in plain view, and looked at the man. Vance stopped dealing cards. His dark eyes settled on Cole with the flat, measuring look of a man who had been in enough dangerous situations to recognize the approach of another one. His right hand, Cole noticed, was very close to the edge of the table, close to his holster below it. "I don't recall inviting company," Vance said. His voice was low and rough, with the texture of gravel in it. "No," Cole said. "You didn't. My name is Cole Hargrove. I'm a bounty hunter working on a U.S. Marshal's bond." There's a warrant for your arrest on 3 counts of armed robbery and 2 counts of murder in the first degree, Doyle. I am authorized to bring you in dead or alive, but I prefer alive because it's less paperwork and considerably more honest." He paused. "The barn is over. The basement is compromised. Wade went out there yesterday and I was there tonight, and I found everything you left behind, including the ledger." The name of the ledger did something to Vance's face, something that was not quite fear and not quite anger, but was made of both. A contraction of the muscles around the eyes and jaw that a less observant man might have missed entirely. His right hand moved slightly. "Don't," Cole said quietly. "Please don't. I have no particular desire to shoot you in this saloon and upset everyone's evening. Come outside with me. We'll talk." "You're alone," Vance said. "Mostly," Cole said. "The wire went to Santa Fe 2 hours ago, but I'm what's here tonight, which makes me the relevant concern." He leaned forward slightly. "The ledger has Wade's name in it front to back. I've read it. Half the territory is going to read it in about 36 hours. Your leverage over him ends the moment those marshals arrive, and you know that as well as I do. You come with me now, you give testimony against Wade, and you might come out of this with your neck intact. You put that hand on that gun and this goes a different direction for both of us." The piano kept playing. The men at the bar were talking about cattle prices. The world of the Red Mesa Saloon turned on its ordinary axis around the still point of the 2 men facing each other across the scattered playing cards. Doyle Vance looked at Cole Hargrove for a long time. Then he looked down at his cards. Then he looked back up. "The Aldrins," Cole said. He had not planned to say it, but it arrived in his voice with a particular weight and he let it stand. "That was your work." Something moved behind Vance's eyes, a darkness that was there, and then compressed out of sight. He picked up a card from the table and turned it over. "Queen of Spades." He set it back down. "I didn't touch the Aldrins," Vance said. "That was Wade's men. The old man came to Wade," Wade told me, "and Wade sent his own deputies to handle it." He said this with the careful precision of a man making a distinction he intended to use later in a courtroom. "But you knew," Cole said. "Knowing ain't doing. In this territory with this particular judge, it might as well be." Cole stood. "Get up, Doyle, slow and easy." Vance sat for one more moment. Then his hand moved away from his holster, and he stood up from the table, pushing his chair back. And Cole came around the table and took the revolver from his holster with a clean, practiced motion and tucked it into his own belt. He cuffed Vance's wrists behind him with the iron restraints from his duster pocket, and they walked out of the Red Mesa Saloon together, past the bar and past the card players and through the swing doors into the cold night air of the main street. And nobody tried to stop them because nobody in Red Rock Flats that night was inclined to put themselves between a bounty hunter with that particular face and whatever he was doing. The problem with Sheriff Denton Wade was not that he was corrupt. Corruption in territorial sheriffs was common enough to be almost unremarkable, a background condition of the land like alkali dust and rattlesnakes. The problem with Sheriff Denton Wade was that he was smart enough to know that everything had changed. The moment a bounty hunter arrived in Red Rock Flats, asking about the Aldrin property, and smart enough to act on that knowledge before most men would have understood what was happening. Cole had Vance locked in the hotel room adjacent to his own. He had paid the sleepy hotel proprietor $3 to vacate the room with the single, direct statement that a federal matter was involved, and was sitting in the chair between the 2 rooms with his Winchester across his knees when he heard the boots on the staircase. Not one man, at least 3. Moving with the careful quiet of men who do not want to be heard, which is the surest way to be heard by someone who is already listening. Cole stood and moved to the wall beside the door of Vance's room and waited. The boots stopped outside the door. Then a voice low, controlled, with the particular flatness of authority that had been held a long time, spoke through the wood. "Hargrove, this is Sheriff Wade. I need you to open this door." Cole said nothing. "I know you're in there," Wade said. "I know what you found out at the Aldrin place. I'm asking you to open this door so we can discuss this situation like reasonable men. There are things you don't understand about this territory and how it works." Cole still said nothing. He was listening past Wade's voice to the sounds behind it, a creak from the corridor to his right, the faint sound of weight shifting on old floorboards. "There are 2 men with me," Wade said. "Deputies. We are duly constituted law enforcement officers, and we have the legal right to—" Cole came through the door of his own room rather than Vance's, moving fast and low, and he came out into the corridor to find 2 men to his right, who had been positioning themselves to flank whoever opened the door to the left. Both men were wearing deputy badges and both had their guns drawn, but neither had expected the door to open where it did, or the man to come out of it moving the way Cole moved. And the Winchester in Cole's hands came up, and the two deputies found themselves looking down its barrel with their own guns only halfway raised. "Drop them," Cole said. "Badges don't change the arithmetic." The deputies looked at each other and then at the Winchester. They dropped their guns. Cole's eyes went to the end of the corridor where Sheriff Denton Wade stood. Wade was a large man, broad through the chest, with close-cropped gray hair and the careful official face of someone who had spent 2 decades managing other people's perceptions of him. He was in his 50s, and he had the heavy-shouldered look of a man who had been strong in his youth and had not gone entirely to waste since. His hand was on his own gun, but he had not drawn it. He was watching Cole with eyes that were calculating and cold and doing their calculations very quickly. "It's over, Sheriff," Cole said. "The wire went to Santa Fe. The marshals are coming. The ledger has your name in it 100 times. He paused. "And I have a witness who heard your voice in that basement yesterday." Wade's calculating eyes went still. "Who?" he said. "Someone who's been there 4 days," Cole said. "Someone who heard every name those men said out loud when they thought no one was listening." He watched Wade's face process this. Elena Marsh. The name hit Wade like a physical thing. His jaw tightened, and for a moment Cole saw the real man behind the official face, frightened and calculating and weighing odds that were no longer in his favor. His hand moved on his gun. "Don't," Cole said. Wade looked at the Winchester, looked at his 2 deputies standing in the corridor with their hands visible and their guns on the floor, looked back at Cole. The calculation ran its course and arrived at its conclusion. Sheriff Denton Wade took his hand off his gun. "Put your hands on your head," Cole said, "and tell your men to do the same." They did. The 2 deputies, whose names turned out to be Sims and Rourke, were young men who had taken the deputy jobs in Red Rock Flats for the $30 monthly wage and had gradually, over 18 months, been drawn deeper into Wade's arrangements through a combination of small favors and accumulating complicity. Neither of them, when faced with the reality of a federal warrant and a bounty hunter holding a rifle, proved to have the kind of loyalty that held under pressure. By midnight, they had told Cole everything they knew about the barn, about the crates, about the payments to Wade, about the night the Aldrin family disappeared. Cole wrote it down in his own notebook, had both men sign the account, and locked them in the hotel's storage room with Vance's discarded playing cards for company. He locked Wade in the Red Rock Flats jail, which struck him as appropriate. Wade had installed that lock himself 2 years prior. Then he went back to his room and knocked on the door and said his name and waited for Elena to take the chair from under the handle. She looked at him when he came in, reading his face with the same steady attention she had shown since he had first pointed a gun at her in the basement, and what she read there told her the essential facts before he spoke them. "Vance and Wade are both secured," Cole said. Wade's deputies cooperated. "The marshals will be here by tomorrow afternoon at the latest." He sat on the edge of the room's small table and looked at the floor for a moment. "You're going to need to testify. Everything you heard in that basement, the voice you recognized as Wade's. Are you prepared to do that?" "Yes," Elena said without hesitation. "It won't be comfortable. Wade has friends in this county. Vance has men who are still at large. We got 4 named in the deputy's account, but there may be more." "Mr. Hargrove," Elena said, "my father runs 300 head of cattle and raised 4 daughters on a quarter section of land in a territory where men like Vance and Wade set the terms for everything. I know exactly what I'm testifying to and exactly who I'm testifying against." She paused. Comfort doesn't really enter into it. Cole looked at her. He thought about what it had taken to stay in that basement for 4 days alone, in the dark, knowing what she knew, with Vance's men moving above her. He thought about the tracks he had found outside the barn, the second set, lighter, moving in a small, tight circle before going south. Elena, he now understood, who had gone out for air and water from the horse trough behind the ruins, and had been going back in when she heard him approaching and retreated underground. 4 days of that. No complaint, no collapse, no self-pity, just endurance and the clear-eyed decision to survive. "Your father's going to be glad to see you," he said finally. "He's going to be furious," Elena said. "I was supposed to wait for an escort." And then, unexpectedly, she laughed a short, exhausted sound that had real warmth in it despite everything, and Cole found himself almost smiling which was not something his face was particularly accustomed to. "You can wire him from the telegraph office in the morning," he said. "Hicks opens at 7. The deputy U.S. Marshal, who arrived from Santa Fe the following afternoon, was a methodical man named Ashford, lean and precise, with the look of someone who had been disappointed by human nature so many times that he had achieved a kind of philosophical peace about it. He arrived with 3 men, read through Cole's notes and the ledger and the deputy's signed accounts, examined the prisoners in the jail, spoke with Elena for 40 minutes, and then went to the barn with 2 of his men to inventory the contents of the basement. He came back to Red Rock Flats with the ledger and a sealed crate of documents from the army shipment, and a look on his face that suggested even he had been surprised by the scope of it. 2 years of documented corruption, he said to Cole, sitting across from him in the hotel room where Cole had brought Vance in the previous night. 15 separate robbery operations, Wade's name as co-conspirator on 9 of them, and the Aldrin family. He paused, tapping the ledger with one finger. "We've been looking for those 4 people for 18 months. Officially listed as departed the territory. This ledger has enough in it to reopen that inquiry." "The Aldrin family deserves that," Cole said. "Yes, they do." Ashford looked at him. "The reward bond on Vance stands $450, payable on delivery to federal custody. I can issue the voucher today." He paused. "There's also the matter of your assistance in apprehending a corrupt county sheriff and securing federal evidence at considerable personal risk. The Marshal Service has a provision for that. It's not large. Keep it," Cole said. "Put it toward whatever the county uses to look after families who lost people to these men." Ashford looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man reassessing a prior conclusion. Then he nodded. "All right," he said. "I'll see to that." Cole stood and picked up his hat from the table. "Where are you going?" Ashford said. "I have 3 days' rest owed to this horse," Cole said. "After that there's a man in Colorado with a warrant on him, and I told the bond issuer I'd have him by the end of the month." "Another barn with a basement?" Ashford said, with the faint suggestion of dry humor. "I hope not," Cole said. "Once was enough." He went downstairs and out through the front door of the hotel into the main street of Red Rock Flats, where the afternoon sun was burning white and the dust was moving in small spirals in the cross-street wind. Elena Marsh was standing at the hitch post with a roan mare that the hotel livery had located for her, not the horse she had originally ridden, which was still somewhere south of town with a thrown shoe, but a serviceable animal that would get her to Silver Creek. She had washed and brushed out her hair and looked considerably less like someone who had spent 4 days underground, though the hollows of exhaustion were still visible in her face. "Your father must have sent half the valley when he got the wire," Cole said, nodding at the mare. "He sent his foreman and 2 hands and enough lecture material to last until Christmas," Elena said. "They're waiting at the north end of town." She looked at Cole steadily. "I wanted to say goodbye properly. You didn't have to bring me out of that basement. You had what you came for, the ledger was already enough, and you could have left me there and come back with the marshals." Cole thought about saying something about professional obligation, about witness protection, about the logistics of the situation. He thought about saying something dismissive, the way he usually did with expressions of gratitude, which he had always found vaguely uncomfortable. Instead he said, 4 days in that basement with Vance's men walking over your head. You held yourself together. That takes something. Elena nodded once, accepting this without false modesty. She swung up onto the roan with the easy competence she had promised in the basement, and she looked down at him from the saddle with those steady brown eyes. "I hope your next job is simpler," she said. "They never are," Cole said. She smiled at that, not the exhausted half-laugh from the night before, but something genuine and unguarded, and she rode north up the main street of Red Rock Flats toward the foreman and the hands and the long road home to Silver Creek. Cole stood and watched until she turned the corner at the north end of town and was gone. Then he turned back toward the livery stable where Cinder waited with 3 days of rest and good feed ahead of him before the long ride to Colorado. There was a particular kind of justice in the West that had nothing to do with courts or warrants or the careful machinery of federal law, though it sometimes worked alongside those things. It was the justice of the land itself, the way the desert preserved evidence, and the way fire, despite everything it destroyed, left the hardest things intact. The Aldrin barn had burned. The ash had lain on the ground for 18 months, while a dead man's property was listed for auction and sold for $1. And beneath the ash, beneath the charred timber, The room and the ledger and the crates of army rifles had waited with the patient indifference of things that do not know they are waiting but simply endure. Doyle Vance would stand trial in Santa Fe within the month. Sheriff Denton Wade would stand trial shortly after, and the proceedings would be complicated and lengthy and ultimately decisive. The ledger would serve as the foundation of both cases, its 100 entries of dates and names and amounts, making the arguments that men's words alone rarely could. The two deputies, Sims and Rourke, would cooperate fully with the federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges, and what they said in that courtroom would close the question of the Aldrin family with a finality that was not comfortable but was at least true, which is the closest thing to comfort that the bereaved can sometimes get. The crates of army rifles and ammunition would be transported back to Fort Sumner under military escort, and the quartermaster sergeant who had been bribed to look away from their absence would find himself explaining that decision to a military tribunal. Elena Marsh would testify, calmly and precisely and at considerable length, before a federal grand jury in Santa Fe in the spring. Her father would sit in the gallery and look at his daughter on the witness stand and understand, with the particular complicated pride of a man recognizing something in his child that he had perhaps underestimated, that she had not needed the escort after all. Cole Hargrove would collect the $450 on Doyle Vance's warrant, settle his tab at the Red Rock Flats Hotel, tip Hicks at the telegraph office $1 for his services, and ride north toward Colorado, with Cinder moving easy in the cold morning air. He would not think much about the barn or the basement or the year and a half of buried truth that a dollar bill at a land auction had uncovered. He was not, by temperament, a man who dwelt on what had already been resolved. There were always more warrants, there were always more trails going cold in the desert, waiting to be found. But he would think sometimes riding through the long afternoons, through the canyon country and the red rock mesas and the endless blue distances of the territory, about 4 days of darkness and the decision to remain in it, to hold still and endure and keep faith with the idea that eventually, if you held on long enough, someone would come through the trapdoor with a lantern. He thought sometimes that there was something in that worth carrying. The burned-out barn, slowly returning to earth in the desert sun of Red Rock Flats, kept no further secrets. The land accepted the ruins back into itself the way the West always did, without sentiment, without ceremony, with only the wind and the patient work of seasons turning it all, eventually, to dust. But some things, once found, cannot be made unfound. A bounty hunter bought a burned-out barn for $1, and what the basement concealed was enough to bring down 2 men who had believed themselves untouchable, enough to speak for 4 people who could no longer speak for themselves, and enough to remind everyone in Red Rock Flats and in every small town in the territory where such arrangements were quietly maintained that the ground beneath their feet was keeping its own accounts. And in the West, the ground always settled its debts. If you made it this far, thank you for riding along. Stories like this one live and die by the people who share them. If you felt that pull of the Old West, that knot in your chest when the trapdoor opened and the truth came rising up out of the dark, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. More stories are waiting just over the ridge, and every one of them has a secret worth uncovering.